All right, how about we get started with a little bit of General Ulysses S. Grant leadership lessons, shall we? It's been a day or two to try and think of some more stories here to go in between these lessons there. So it's kind of difficult sometimes, as you'll see. Anyway, we left off on leadership lesson number 50. Two commanders are one too many. And we are off on 51. Talk to your boss. Less than 3 weeks after capturing Fort Donelson, for which he had been promoted to Major General, Grant's performance was being seriously questioned, and his position was in jeopardy. This followed a period of time during which Grant had been out of communication with his superior, General Henry W. Halleck. Later I learned General Halleck had been called lustily for more troops. McClellan asked him what force he had. Halleck telegraphed me to supply the information so far as my command was concerned, but I received none of his dispatches. At last, Halleck reported to Washington that he had repeatedly ordered me to give the strength of my force, but could get nothing out of me, that I had gone to Nashville beyond the limits of my command, without his authority, and that my army was more demoralized by victory than the army at Bull Run had been by defeat. General McClellan, on this information, ordered that I should be relieved from duty. And the lesson: talk to your boss. If you aren't frequently communicating with the person you are reporting to, you are asking for trouble. Your boss will begin to have doubts and start imagining things. Others, jealous of your success, unfortunately there are a few in any organization, will feed your boss's fears with unsubstantiated rumors. For you, it will be a nightmare, one that could easily have been prevented. If only you had remembered to make communicating with the person you report to one of your top priorities. Yeah, see, what did I think of for that particular lesson? Talk to your boss. How to do a job. Dynamic. How do you want? Asking questions versus doing. So, in my military experience, this dogged me my whole military career. The 6 years and 3 months I was in the Marine Corps. It's being asked to do something versus being told to do something. And in my circumstance, it was always like they'd tell you to do something, and it's like, so you go out and you start to do it, and then they would ask you, why did you do it that way? And they would critique the hell out of it. Why, you should have done it like this, you should have done it like that. So I started to kind of ask questions. They go tell me to do something. Well, how would you like that done? Should I do it like this? Should I do it like that? Well, how should I move this that way, do this that way? Because if I didn't do that, then they would come down on me. Why didn't you do it this way? Why didn't you do it that way? So I started to lean into, all right, so you want me to do it like this? And then after I started doing that persistently, stop asking us questions. Take some initiative. Go do it yourself. Like, why can't you think for yourself? And it's like, I can, but whenever I do, you criticize the hell out of it. I remember this one time when we were in Iraq, right? And we were with Marine Wing Support Squadron 374, the Rhinos. And so what we would do is we would support the airfield. Al Taqaddum was a big air base. And in one instance, they had the Cobra helicopters, I believe. They were coming in through this taxiway, right? And it would kick up a lot of sand and dust. And so one of the ways that they wanted to remedy that was by spraying basically this Elmer's glue, this watery Elmer's glue solution on all the sand and dirt. The idea being that it would keep it down. And so they had this big water sprayer, and they attached it to the back of a Humvee. And so then I got on the back of this water sprayer and started spraying it all over the sand there. Long story short, it didn't work. The helicopters would kick up enough wind to, even though that stuff soaked in a good inch and a half, it would still kick that cake up and throw it, and then the sand underneath would just start picking up again. But in any event, I took it upon myself to lead the charge, do it as I saw fit. And there was one gunny that came in, he's like, well, why'd you do it like that? Why'd you do it like this? And I finally said, well, you weren't around to ask questions, and whatever I do, you tell me I did it wrong, or tell me I didn't do it this way, I didn't do it that. And they finally, okay, roger that, we got it. So, but that followed me everywhere. I have so many examples of that. And in a lot of cases, I think when I really drilled down on is you just need to do it yourself the way you want to do it without asking questions. Because if they start to think that you're always going to ask questions, you can't do it for yourself, then they're always going to see you as someone they can't assign a task to. Whereas if you just do it yourself, even if they think you did it wrong, at least, hey, he does things on his own, and he can get it done, even if it's not the way I like it. So if I could do one thing in my career over, that's certainly one thing I would do. It's just do it my way, regardless of whether they liked it or not. Because trying to bow to how they want you to do it so that you don't have to hear them cry about it later, it just doesn't serve you. So that's my leadership lesson number 51 there. Listen to your boss, or talk to your boss, rather. 52, if falsely accused. On March 4th, 1861, General Halleck sent Grant a telegram in which he accused him of disobedience for failing to report the strength of his command. The following day, Grant replied, I am not aware of ever having disobeyed any order from headquarters. Certainly never intended such a thing. I have reported almost daily the condition of my command. In conclusion, I will say that you may rely on my carrying out your instructions in every particular to the very best of my ability. And the lesson: if you are falsely accused of wrongdoing, unemotionally set the record straight, and try to do so in such a manner as to allow you to resume amicable relations with the person who attacked you. And the first thing I thought of with this one, falsely accused, we were out there in 29 Palms, California, once again with the Rhinos, the Marine Wing Support Squadron, and there's an expeditionary runway out there. Essentially, it's a bunch of ground with these interlocking metal plates, kind of like a bunch of Legos. They all stack up, and they form a runway with all those. I'd say they're about 2.5 feet wide by maybe about 10 or 12 feet long. And they have what you call matting projects every so often, where they replace a bunch of these textured pieces of aluminum. They snap them all into place. They get the whole squadron out there, save maybe 20 folks to kind of man the phones back in the office and such. And they're all out there picking it all up and stacking it in these stacks of, say, 20 to 30. Maybe that's high. But in any event, after that's been picked up, heavy equipment goes through and they flatten out all the shoulders of the runways, and then they put in dirt and gravel. They pack it down, and the grader comes in, puts a final grade on it. And at one point, I was tasked with driving a water truck so as to spray down the shoulders, because once they put in a little bit of concrete on top of all that, you need to maintain a certain amount of wetness and dampness so that the concrete dries properly and it doesn't crack all over the place. And so the surveying team had come in and they'd put in all these little nails with flags going up and down the shoulders. And there I was driving on the main pad where the matting would go over with the water truck. And it was a big old manual stick shift water truck. Well, PTO. You hit the PTO, it starts throwing horsepower and hydraulics over to the sprayer, and then you spray down that concrete. Well, what I failed to do is see some of those nails with the little flags on them, because they were still hard to pick out. And I ended up running over a couple of those nails and flattening the dually tires in the back there. And so I was driving around on the pad for, it must not have been too long, but a little while, and basically the rim was cutting into the final grade on that pad. And somebody finally stopped me, one of the matting crew people that were putting down the pads, and like, hey man, you're driving on oh, that's what it was. One of the tires was already flat. And so they told me, hey man, they wagged me down, hey, you're driving on a flat tire. I was like, well, I know that. And I had asked beforehand, I was like, hey, there's a flat tire on this thing. I shouldn't be driving it. And they go, no, it's fine. Just do it. We know about that already. Go ahead and do it. And since it was a dual tire deal, there was one tire that wasn't flat. Well, I flattened the other one because somebody waved me down and they says, hey, your tire's flat. Oh, I know. I've been given permission to do so. And what they were trying to tell me was both of them were flat. Don't be driving this thing. So I kept driving for a while before someone stopped me again and like, stop, you're driving with two flat tires. I go, two flat tires, what? So I went and I parked the water truck. I told the corporal about it, and he was a little bit miffed. You got to watch out for those nails. I'm like, yeah, well, somebody else flattened the first one, He goes, okay, well, just get in a forklift and go do some work over here, over there. So I went and did that for about 2 hours. And then I drove up to him about 2 hours later afterward, and he's just steaming hot. just mad as hell. I'm like, well, what's the deal? He goes, get back to the shop. You popped a tire on the water truck. I'm like, well, yeah, shut up. Get back to the shop. And then they had me sweeping under the awning, which nobody ever does, kind of as a punishment. And that corporal eventually came back and kind of making it sound like I was going to be threatened with a little bit of a demotion for having ruined the water truck or whatever. In any event, I reckon what happened was somebody found out about the flat tire higher up, like a staff NCO, and they came down on him. What did you do about it? I got him out there working or whatever, and wow, and basically alluded that I needed to chew my ass. This is all I don't know. I'm guessing. But there was no rhyme or reason why he would suddenly be so hot at me for all of that. Now, how does that tie in with the leadership lesson there of if falsely accused? I think I ended up going to the gunny afterward and kind of explaining myself. And he was like, you need to be more careful, more watchful, so to speak. Hey, roger that. I didn't need to get my ass chewed and be micromanaged with sweeping under the awning for all that garbage. But I don't know. There was some weird dynamics in that whole platoon. Corporals weren't allowed to do their what they were assigned to do without being micromanaged by sergeants, and maybe on up. I'm not sure. I was never in that particular echelon of leadership in that platoon. I was just one of the subordinates who got his ass chewed all the time. So could have been stuff going on that I wasn't privy to. Probably was. But that's what it made me think of if falsely accused. Moving on. Number 53. On reporting to a former subordinate. Grant believed the underlying reason for General Halleck's attempt to have him relieved of command was because Halleck wanted to replace Grant with General Charles F. Smith. It is probable that the general opinion was that Smith's long service in the Army and distinguished deeds rendered him the more proper person for such command. Indeed, I was rather inclined to this opinion myself at the time, and would have served as faithfully under Smith as he had done under me. Later in the war, upon being placed in command of all the Union armies, Grant recommended that General Don Carlos Buell be restored to duty. Buell declined, saying that it would be degradation to accept this assignment offered. I understood afterwards that he refused to serve under either Sherman or Canby because he had ranked them both. The worst excuse a soldier can make for declining service is that he once ranked the commander he is ordered to report to. And the lesson. You will have the opportunity to work with people both more or less capable than yourself. If you are lucky, you will have the privilege of having people work for you who are more capable than you. At some point, you may find yourself reporting to someone who was formerly your subordinate. If that occurs, don't go sit in your tent and soak. When that person was working for you, he or she undoubtedly turned in a stellar performance that inured your credit. Now you owe no less. What did I think of for this particular leadership lesson on reporting to your subordinate? I don't think I wrote one down. But it does make me think of peers. Peers, specifically people you served with, who then surmount your position and become your boss, so to speak. I worked at old AutoZone there for a little while, and we had people that were just comrades in arms, right? We were having a great time. And then one of them inevitably became our boss. And I think it was the first time he was in a position of not necessarily leadership, but ultimate responsibility for the store. And I don't want to say he didn't handle it well. I just don't think he was anticipating the things that would come down on him. He also wasn't willing to say no to the people who were telling him what to do, like the managers of the district, so to speak. They were sending him outside the store to go do things for other stores and do this and that. So then our store was starting to falter on a variety of different levels. And then the stresses just started to get to him. And it was like he changed into a totally different person. Someone that a lot of us didn't necessarily want to work with. when he was in that capacity. And it just changed the whole dynamic of the store. And unfortunate, because everybody loved him until he became the manager. And at which point a lot of us were getting a little bit, stressed, so to speak. Makes me think of that. What else? We had a corporal who, again, a peer for a very long time, so he got promoted to corporal. And then he had to start flexing his position there for those of us that had been with him at that point. But we had to see that he was now the one in the position of responsibility. And a lot of times, I think they just, if they're new to the role, they don't know how to. I'm not saying I do, but they just don't know how to swing that or juggle the position they used to have with what they have now. And then the fact that there's people above them who are like, why aren't you telling them what to do? Why aren't you climbing in their ass and doing that? And so then they start to become a jerk just to try and get their point across. And it's like, you see right through it. You know what's going on. And, you kind of want to laugh, but then you run the risk of being seen as someone who's disrespecting the NCO, which is a chargeable offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice there. So you just got to kind of suck it up and learn to live with it, and hope that they figure out a way to juggle those different dynamics that can throw the whole machine off kilter there. Anyway, that's the few things makes me think of there. And let's move on to number 54, which I'm pretty sure I did write something for. Chapter 5 we're moving into. See the total picture. All right. April 6th through April 7th, 1862. Nearly one man in 4 is killed, wounded, or captured. Over 20,000 in all on the bloody battlefield of Shiloh. At the end of the first day's fighting, even Sherman believes that the Union Army must retreat. Grant, who has been to every point on the field and can see the total picture, knows better. The next day, he orders a counterattack. The Confederates retreat, and Grant wins one of the costliest battles of the war. Leadership lesson number 54. Retain your humanity. Before leaving Mexico in 1848, Grant had attended a bullfight, not wishing to leave the country without having witnessed the national sport. The sight to me was sickening. I could not see how human beings could enjoy the suffering of beasts, and often men, as they seemed to do on these occasions. Grant commanded the Union forces at the Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee, which was fought on the 6th and 7th of April, 1862. At the end of the first day's fighting, Grant's army had been forced back, and the Confederates occupied the tents that the Union troops had slept in the previous night. Grant and his men had to sleep in the open. Grant, who in great pain from a badly swollen ankle, a consequence of a horse having fallen on him 3 days earlier, made his headquarters under a tree. Rain began to fall in torrents. I moved to the log house under the bank. This had been taken as a hospital, and all night wounded men were being brought in, their wounds dressed, a leg or an arm amputated as the case might require, and everything being done to save a life or alleviate suffering. The sight was more unendurable than encountering the enemy's fire, and I returned to my tree in the rain. Lesson: don't be callous or indifferent to the suffering of others, especially if their suffering results from the action that you felt compelled to take. You can't let the fact that some or even many will suffer stop you from doing what is necessary for the good of the organization. But you can make certain that what you have to do is done as humanely as possible. All right, humanity. Maintain your humanity. Or retain, rather. Well, the first thing this made me think of was actually attending a bullfight when I was assigned to the embassy in Quito, Ecuador. We had a semi-annual inspection, and in those cases, the captain from the company will come down to inspect the detachment and the various jobs they all have to, all the Marines have to perform. And so they generally schedule some sort of debt excursion or event for them to go out and do, and one of which was a bullfight there in Quito, Ecuador. And I happened to be one of the Marines that wasn't on duty, so we went out to the bullfight, and I didn't really know what to expect. But it was quite jarring, cultural disconnect, so to speak. You come in, and the first thing is they bring that bull in, and they bring the horses in with the blinders so that they can't see the bull and spook. And the first thing they do is they get that bull bleeding. So that as they're, they hit it with all the spears, all the showmanship, and I do believe that they hit it with a pikes to get it to start bleeding out. But these bulls, they're just, if any of you haven't ever been around a bull, they are beasts. They're massive. And they just keep going. These things, it's very impressive to see how long and how hard these things can continually charge. And they're dying because you can just see the blood coming out of them, and you see their lungs just heaving for breath when these things are just they're trying to get every ounce of life out of themselves to fight this matador, and then just charging back and forth across this ring. And at a certain point, me, myself, the humanity, I started rooting for the bull, to the point where when these matadors would get tossed, if they got hit, I was like, yeah, I was rooting for the bull, And then long after the course of the thing had ended, you started wondering, like, geez, that was a person down there, getting tossed. But there was a certain point, too, where the matadors, they have to strike that killing blow with the sword, and they have to drive it into a certain place in the bull in order to strike the heart, I'm assuming. This one particular matador just couldn't get it. He would do the whole song and dance, the bull would come by, and he would do the sword, but the sword would tink. It would hit off of a vertebra or a rib, and it wouldn't go in where it was supposed to. And there was only a certain number of times they allowed him to do that, I think. And he missed, and so they came in and they took a pike, I'm guessing, something with a long protruding point on it, and they brained the bull with it. And then that matador, he was kind of a disgrace because he wasn't able to kill it with the sword. Whereas if another guy did a good fight, they'd cut the ears off the dead bull and kind of give it to him as a trophy of sorts. But no, it was, like I said, cultural disconnect. Everybody around us is cheering, and here I am a little bit mortified at the whole thing. So not necessarily a war story per se, but again, that was the first thing that came to mind, and it did happen while I was in the Marine Corps, so I figured it was worth the telling. And it has to do with the morality and the humanity of things. So let's move on to number 55, which will round out this session of Grant Leadership Lessons. Teach the most important lessons first. Grant was criticized for having the foresight to have his troops dig in and behind fortifications at Shiloh. The troops with me, officers and men, needed discipline and drill more than they did experience with the pick, shovel, and axe. Reinforcements were arriving almost daily, composed of troops that had been hastily thrown together into companies and regiments. Fragments of incomplete organizations, the men and officers strangers to each other. Under these circumstances, I conducted the drill and discipline. I concluded, rather, that the drill and discipline were worth more to our men than fortifications. And the lesson: having a well-trained staff is critically important. However, since you can't teach new people everything they need to know all at once, be sure you teach the most important lessons first. Usually, those are the ones that allow them to begin to contribute to the organization in the shortest possible time frame. All right. And that led me to remember a certain case of forklift operating or material handling. And it dives back in with the matting project I mentioned previously. All those, mats of aluminum that we put into stacks. You had to move those off the runway and then out to the recovery shop. It was called the recovery platoon. They were the platoon that was responsible for catching the planes out there on the runway. And they also stored and did the logistics for getting in new mat and trucking out the old stuff to be retextured. They called us the rhinos because the matting had this what you call green texture on it. It's like if you took a fall, you'd be skinning more than your knee. This stuff was It was so rough, but he had to catch those airplane tires, right? So in any event, I was tasked with doing some recovery that day and moving all these stacks of mat that were banded up onto a tractor trailer, and I had civilians come in, do all that. And so we want to talk about training your Marines or your people to do the right thing, even though they might not necessarily be in the situation that they are in. But they haven't been there before. They don't know what's going on. Hopefully that training teaches a little bit of common sense so that they can figure out what to do should a situation they've never been in occur. And in this particular circumstance, I was loading up those stacks of mat, which who knows how much they weighed. Heavy though, because you would set the mat down on that tractor trailer and you'd watch the bed move, right? Well, we had the civilian, this larger gentleman. He was out there trying to ground guide me, trying to show me where to put the forks and so on. And I was on uneven ground to begin with. If memory serves, I was on a slope, so kind of pointed down and off to the side a little bit, and trying to get the forks in there and pull out and keep them level. I mean, you're doing a variety of different things and moving things so that it's all smooth and fluid. You're oscillating the carriage, moving the forks back and forth, backing up, and then you're trying to maintain a view and a vantage of what's going on around you so you don't necessarily like run somebody over who's not paying attention, whatever. In this particular case, the civilian gentleman was standing right under the mats, right up against the truck bed there, and something slipped and those mats came out and they started waffling off just like a deck of cards. And so those things probably weigh 200-300 pounds. You know, they take 4 people to move sometimes, depending upon how strong the person is. It's on either end. And if this guy had been standing 1 foot closer or farther away from where he was, those stacks would have come right down on him. And so you have to, in this particular circumstance, like you can't train for that particular moment, but you have to have the cognizance to be able to stop and be like, hey, you need to move out of the way, sir. You know, like, what are you talking about? Well, if this thing comes apart, you're standing right under it. Well, that'll never happen. It's like, well, in that case, it did happen. So I was lucky that gentleman wasn't closer to the accident than he was, because he would have died and I would have had a confirmed kill with a forklift. And that wasn't the only time something like that almost happened. But that's a story for another time. That has been General Ulysses S. Grant, Cigars, Whiskey, and Winning Leadership Lessons. Numbers, what were they? 51 through 55 there, I do believe. Anyway, it's been fun, and come on back for some more stories and leadership lessons. All right, let's move on.